Hey, how's it going? It's Martin. So today I want to talk a little bit about the difference between a 1.8 and a 1.4 lens when you're shooting portraits of people. Um, I often get asked this question, and I was actually deliberating on this question when I first started out because a 1.8 lens, especially if you're thinking about like a 50 millimeter or even an 85 millimeter, a 1.8 and a 1.4, that's like that's like a half a stop or a third of a stop. It's like so small that, yeah, it is half a stop, 1.8, because you go 1.4, then 1.6, 1.8, and an f2. Now, the problem with, really like making this decision just based on which lens is that they're honestly both so similar when you're going to shoot at a wide open f-stop that you're not going to see so much of a difference in bokeh or blur behind the subject. So really the question comes down to sharpness and also whether you need that extra 2/3 stops of light. Let's think about it this way. Let's say that you're shooting outside and it's dark out. If you shoot at an f1.8 lens and let's just assume that you're able to keep everything sharp and focus. If you're shooting with an f1.8 lens and you need to be, let's say, at 1/30th of a second handheld, that can be a little bit challenging to get the shot just looking just right. Now, if you are able to use a 1.4, you can go all the way up to, say, like 1/50th of a second, which it might be just a little bit shorter of a shutter burst that you could actually get less camera shake. That's honestly probably the only reason that I would recommend going for the f1.4 if you're not so concerned about perfect sharpness. Now, we will talk about sharpness here. So in some cases, especially like, let's say, shooting headshots or shooting, spaces, shooting in low light cases even there, whenever you need to shoot at a wide open aperture, generally speaking, the lens is not going to be as sharp as you open the aperture wider. So if you take that f1.4 lens and you shoot it in an f4, and then you take that same f1.8 lens and you shoot it in an f4, you are probably going to notice that the f1.4 is just a tiny bit sharper. And especially when you're shooting with a wide open aperture, it'll be noticeably sharper than the f1.8 lens. In many cases, like in my case, if we're shooting headshot photography, it doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect 100% sharpness because remember, we're not shooting for billboards. Most of the case, headshots are used as thumbnails, so you don't need that perfection level because once it's shrunk down, you're not going to see all those details. On the other hand, if you're concerned about shooting for big magazine spreads or anything that's going to be like, an advertisement, something bigger, or if you're doing like architectural photography, you may want to invest in the more expensive 1.4 lens because that it will result in a little bit of extra sharpness. Now, the question of is it worth the price difference, that's up to you to decide. In general, you're going to find for just 2/3 of a stop more, the price is going to cost about 4 times as much. So you're going to take a, let's say, Nikon or Canon 50 millimeter f1.8, which you can buy for about $100. Then you want to get an, f1.4. And in some cases, that's going to be almost $400. I mean, you might be lucky and find it for like $300 or $250 or something. But in general, you're going to be looking at about 4 times price increase. Same thing with, say, f1.8 85 millimeter lens. You get that, you can get that for like $350, $400. Then if you want to shoot it in an f1.4, you're looking at spending about $1,600. So the question of is it really worth it really depends on how detail oriented you are and how much that little tiny difference is worth it to you. In reality, I've shot with both lenses, and usually it's kind of hard to tell in terms of the blurred the blurriness of the background. You can shoot at a 1.8, you can shoot at a 1.4, and when you take the pictures, it's going to be hard to see much of a difference between one image being blurred out. Now, I'm going to have to stop for a second and complicate this just a little bit more so that you understand the full scope of this. Let's say that you have an f1.4 lens, okay? And you shoot that lens at a f1.8 aperture. You, in that case, will probably not see any difference at all because the quality of the blur or the bokeh behind the subject when it's all blurry and like colorful or whatever, like let's say you're shooting outside, because the size of the front lens element is really large, it's going to smooth out the blur more. So it's going to look more like creamy, they say, or just kind of blended properly. Okay, you can shoot all the way, you can stop down to like an f4, an f5.6, and you're going to still have that same smoothness or creaminess to the background versus these harsh circles, okay? So it's a little bit of a difference when it comes to quality. Now, if you were to take an actual f1.8 lens where the front lens element is significantly smaller, now you actually are going to see a little bit of a difference when you're looking for how smooth or how creamy the background blur is. You can, in many cases, start to see a little bit more of edges around things. And if you notice that, that might be a deterrent for you to get the cheaper lens, okay? Are your clients going to notice that? Unless you're shooting for magazine spreads and stuff where they work with professional photographers all the time, chances are no, and chances are the clients won't care that much because the image will still look professional. This is, though, something to keep in mind, especially if you're going to be moving your photography career to higher and higher levels over time. You may want to invest in the more expensive lens eventually. But would I recommend it to start? Definitely not. You can totally get away with shooting a f1.8 and know that it's kind of like a curve like this. So like you start, actually it's a curve like this, right? I forget what this is called, like a logarithmic curve or something. At the beginning, you start with your kit lens and you spend just a little bit more to get a prime lens, and you suddenly jump way up in quality and you get something that's like this much more, where like price is going across the bottom, quality is going this way, right? You get to here and you're like, wow, I just invested in a prime lens. Then you spend like way more and you just get a teeny bit more quality for spending way more. So I usually suggest when you're starting to invest your money wisely and get the lenses that you need, and don't go for just the best of the best, because that will significantly reduce the amount of shoots or types of work that you can take on. We're going to talk more about marketing strategies in the future and about refining and honing in on your specific target market and everything. But for someone who's starting out in photography, spend your money on a wider variety of lenses that are not going to break your bank, so that you can find out exactly what type of photography you most enjoy doing, what type of, if you're getting into headshots, what type of clients you like working with, how close you like to shoot your headshots, and all of that. This way you can kind of learn on the cheaper lenses. Then you invest more money on those more expensive lenses. You fix those little teeny subtle imperfections. You can blur it out just a teeny bit more and really make your shots look amazing. And then you'll hone in on your very specific, as they would call it, target niche in the marketing and business world, okay? So hopefully this video is helpful. If you have any advice or tips on how to select the best lens for headshots, or the difference that you've seen between an f1.4 and f1.8 lens, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And I'll be back tomorrow with another great video. As always, live with purpose.